Hello and welcome to the Gonzales Mitchell Show. I'm Clay Mitchell.
I'm not. I'm Patrick Gonzales.
And today, Patrick and I are going to have part two of our discussion with Joy Ditto, who is the CEO of Joy Ditto Consulting, to talk about all things AI, electricity, and data centers. Joy, welcome to our show.
Thanks for having me back, Clay, and nice to meet you, Patrick. I didn't get to see you on the first installment, so glad you're back from your space travels or wherever you've been.
World, yes.
well, Joy, just so you don't have to go through your whole resume again, but just for those that didn't see the first episode, shame on them. Tell us a little bit about what Joy Ditto Consulting does.
Well, so I represent clients in the electric utility sector primarily, but some related sectors as well, on policy matters, on industry issues and strategy. But I've been in this sector, in the electric sector, representing the electric sector for about 25 years. And then before that, I was on Capitol Hill for about 8 years. So I've been around DC and around policy for a long time, but specific to the electric sector for about 25 years.
Well, that sounds electrifying. I'm sorry. It's another bad joke. I'm sorry. Joy, there's a lot of discussion in this country the past couple of years about data centers, and they need to be powered in order to do the AI that we're all having to get acclimated to. We have China putting up data centers, and they don't even miss a beat putting up electrical plants. They'll put a coal burning power plant up. They'll do nat gas. They'll do whatever they need to do to get these data centers up. There's a hesitation and a bit of gravity holding Americans back, and that has to do with the perception that data centers are pulling so much energy off the grid that it's harming residential customers and other commercial customers by having higher bills. What say you?
There's so much in that question, so I'm gonna I'll definitely address. But I mean, first of all, yes, we're in an AI competition with China. The good news is there is one state right next to Maryland, where I live in Virginia, that actually has the most data centers of any place in the world right now. So we have made progress, and there have been places in the country where data centers have been sited. But now that you raise this issue of there's more understanding and knowledge around data centers as they've grown. And as you mentioned, China doesn't have environmental laws like we know them. They might say they do, but they don't. They don't have they don't have personal property laws or, anything that kind of governs how we think about our own territory and how we want to shape our own communities. They just don't have that. So the federal government there can just do whatever it wants. And that's not what we have in our country, thankfully. That's what we don't want. But the data center and the AI race and the data centers that support AI is real because there are national security implications that we don't necessarily need to get into now, but it is an really important issue for the country. But the issue is that national security issue being federal really kind of lands locally. So it's an interesting dynamic where you have local decisions that have federal national security impacts. And also, obviously, electricity usage is one element of those local decisions. So to your question about are data centers causing electricity rates to rise, and is that a concern that's sort of a valid concern or not? It's really not a valid concern in most places, according to Energy Information Administration data, which is kind of Energy Information Administration, regardless of who's in the White House, is well known for its neutral data that it collects very, very rigorously. So Energy Information Administration data underpins several reports that really show that data centers are not correlated to higher electricity rates, at least not right now. That may change over time because you do need to build extra infrastructure. And if something's not structured correctly, if the rate design isn't structured correctly, it may cause rates to increase. But there is a big exception to that. And that exception is unfortunately in the Pennsylvania, Jersey, Maryland interconnection, which is PJM interconnection. A lot of people don't know about it, but it's a wholesale marketplace structure that we talked about before, that where utilities that have their own generation, which are few and far between in kind of that 13 state region, but utilities that own their own generation, and then these independent power producers bid in their generation. And unfortunately, the way that marketplace, I say marketplace in quotes because it's not really a marketplace in a traditional sense, the way it's structured is that it doesn't really incentivize capacity build outs that are needed for sort of future demand. And also, it's really not building, it's not enabling utilities and these independent power producers to build generation at the rate, power generation, power plants, at the rate that they're needed to meet the demand for data centers and other things like electrification and other large manufacturing facilities, things like that. So really there is a market distortion in this particular region. With, the interesting part about Virginia versus Maryland is there's a lot of things I could say about that, but Virginia versus Maryland in this particular situation is that Maryland has told its electric utilities that it can't own generation power plants anymore. It can only do wires and poles, transmission and distribution. But contrastingly, the state of Virginia has allowed its utilities to continue to own power plants. And so therefore, the utilities in Virginia can bid their own power plants into this PJM interconnection and bring those dollars back to their own states. Maryland can't completely control that right now. So there is a policy decision, I think, within PJM. But elsewhere in the country, there's no correlation between data centers being cited and rate increases at all. In fact, the opposite. There are many data center states that have seen rate reductions. But again, there's a whole mix of things that cause that. And there may be, you really still have to negotiate what that looks like as you build infrastructure out. So there is still a room for negotiation in states and localities when data centers are being cited. But the idea that they're raising rates just because they're citing is not true.
You mentioned a word that I think is a term of art in the electric industry. You mentioned capacity.
Sorry.
And there's capacity and supply. I know there's a difference between the two. Can you explain the difference between all that? And it looks like Patrick is on the dark side of the moon. But go ahead.
Yes, I think he went back to Artemis too, right?
Right.
We had to leave us for a moment.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
We can.
Yes, we can.
Okay, because I can't see Clay. I can see Joy, but I can't see Clay.
Oh no. You're the only one we can't see. Like we said, I think you're broadcasting from the dark side of the moon here, Patrick.
Well, Clay, do you want me to continue while Patrick?
Yeah, go ahead, continue. This makes for good television. Go ahead.
All right, sounds good. So yes, thank you for calling me out on my terminology. I try not to do that, but I let it slip in.
Right.
So electricity actually is delivered it is created in power plants and delivered instantaneously for the most part. Storage is not broadly available yet in the sector. And so you are really balancing generation of electricity and transmission and usage of it instantaneously all the time. So because of that, you have to manage your infrastructure to deal with the hottest day of the year or the coldest day of the year. We refer to that as peaks in the sector. Right. So think of like a big snow-capped peak, the highest. And that means what capacity means is you want to have the capacity to meet that peak. So we think about capacity in terms of how much each power plant can actually produce at its maximum, right? So if you have a power plant that's 100 megawatts, for example, that's the maximum it can potentially produce. It might be slightly less than that, but that's the nameplate capacity, right? So as opposed to actual generation. So that particular power plant on a blue sky day where the weather's kind of temperate, it may only need to produce 80 megawatts out of that 100, right? So that's the difference between actual generation and capacity.
Gotcha.
You can hear me.
Hello.
Yes.
Paul 13, come in, please.
You want to jump in?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you. We can hear you, 13.
Let me ask Joy a question if I could. So
Okay.
What you're telling me is the way the PJM or whatever is structured, it does not incentivize producers of energy to produce a maximum amount. Why is that correct? Why is that? Is that moronic politicians I'm dead serious. As you stated very accurately, China can do whatever they want.
Mm-hmm.
Or we have politicians that are hell bent on some feel-good emotional jolt that they are instituting policies that make it not an incentive for a company to generate its maximum amount of power. Is that an accurate statement?
So I think what I would say is politicians allowed for this construct to move forward, and it's been around for a long time. The reason why we haven't heard as much about this constraint before is because we haven't had much electricity. Electricity demand has been relatively flat for the last 20 years because we've created a lot of efficiencies in the system, energy efficiency programs at the low, sort of the retail level. And then we've tried to create more and more efficiency in the system so that we don't need to build new power plants for a variety of reasons that people, may or may not agree with, for emissions, reductions, things like that. And we just haven't had the level of demand like we're seeing with data centers and with other electrification, as I mentioned before, and some of these larger manufacturing facilities coming back online. So yes, the politicians have blessed this structure of PJM interconnection. And they've also blessed some similar structures around the country. They don't exist everywhere, but they certainly exist in some places in the country. So it's been blessed. And I mean, the issue is that there's not a lot of oversight. Once the federal government sort of blessed the construct and they let it kind of run itself, the actual people who run the day-to-day PJM, it's a not-for-profit, but the utilities and the independent power producers that actually derive profits from it are very much profit-driven. And so some of the constructs and the lobbying that's gone on sort of internally to this construct, I would say maybe obscures the amount of profits that are actually being gleaned. And all of this is kind of coming more to light as demand increases. And as the demand signal that you would normally expect to create supply is not happening. You're not seeing these power plants that are needed getting built and getting built quickly, partially because of other factors too. Permitting and siting is difficult, but it's also because these independent power producers, constraint is good for them, right? And so you have seen one of the things that has been sort of a canary in the coal mine here, Patrick, is that you have seen these peak days, like really, hot days or really cold days. And it's actually been more on the cold side. There was a winter storm a couple of years ago called Winter Storm Elliott. I don't know if you remember it, where there was a huge amount of constraint in the PJM system. And when you put that kind of constraint on the system, not only do you have outages, blackouts, sometimes you have like actual you have failures in the equipment. So it hasn't been built, to your point, it has not been built to manage that potential for new capacity. It's been built to become more efficient. So day to day, there's some efficiencies that have been created, but that's not how we need to be thinking about our electric system. We need to be able to manage it such that we can meet demand, and we have an obligation to serve that demand. And we can anticipate these peaks. where the politicians come in Maryland is, 25 years ago, they said, utilities, you can't own power plants anymore because we think you're a vertical, it's bad to have sort of this vertical integration, and that's driving up costs. And that just hasn't proven to be true. And elsewhere, in other parts of the country where utilities still own their power plants, prices have not risen as high as they have in Maryland and in other places in other places that have done the same thing, like Pennsylvania. Hopefully that answers your question.
Talk to me about.
Sorry, go ahead. I was just going to say one more question.
I was going to say.
There is culpability.
Go ahead.
There is culpability with decision makers for sure, but some of those decisions were made 25 years ago. The good news is that there's a chance to revisit them, and a very urgent need to do so.
Good.
So,
talk to us about nuclear power. Some data centers have come in, like Microsoft is taking over part of the 3 Mile Island facility, going to upgrade it so that it can generate energy. Should there be a responsibility on data center owners and those sort of companies to put up their own power generation plants, including nuclear?
I think it depends on the state and the particular circumstances. If a state is long on power, and there are some states that have more power than they need, so they're exporting their power outside of the state because they don't have the manufacturing or the population that needs the power. But if they have extra power, in that situation, maybe the utility says, no, like, come on in, we have extra, we need you, and we'll be able to accommodate you. But in other cases where power is more constrained, yeah, that is something that is on, definitely part of the negotiation, and they should be discussing that with policymakers at the state level, at the local level, with the utility. And data centers don't just need power; they need water, they need fiber, which is sort of telecommunications. They need some sort of transportation because they need to be able to build the data center itself. So there's other infrastructure that's needed. So it's really a local kind of economic development conversation, as well as a state, maybe where are the best sites in the state that have all of these infrastructures available. And then if there is a need for more power generation, then that should certainly be part of the conversation. I will say that, so there may be times when there may be a situation where the data centers say, we're going to bring our own generation, but eventually we want to hook up to the power grid because that brings economies of scale. We can sell our generation when it's needed for others, right? And vice versa. So coming back to that system-wide economy of scale. But that's really those are the conversations that are needed, and how that affects existing ratepayers, and all of those calculations are part of the dynamic that needs to happen, transparently, right, amongst the stakeholders that are involved and amongst the regulators that regulate power rates if the utility is hooking up the data center.
Are we going to get to the
point where...
We're
going to talk about nuclear too. We're going to talk about nuclear, sorry.
No, it's okay, go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry. So, and nuclear is, the interesting part about nuclear, we were talking about that capacity. So remember when I was saying how you have a power plant and it has 100 megawatts of capacity, right? A lot of times, some power plants, that is in an ideal world, that's how much they can produce. But think of wind. Wind is oftentimes not, wind's not blowing all the time. So that capacity, it's called a capacity factor, is never really achieved for wind because it's not a 24/7 resource. It has other benefits, but it's not that. Nuclear actually has the highest capacity factor, meaning when you put a nuclear power plant in place, you can turn that thing on and it's at 100% for about 18 months typically. And then it usually needs to go down for maintenance for a few months, and then it comes back on and it's 100%. Now, if you do have to power it down for some reason, that is challenging, and then it doesn't power back up quickly. Unlike natural gas, which can ramp down and ramp up very easily. And coal is somewhere in the middle. And I know there's no coal, in a lot of places still, but there is in some places. So just for your listeners' understanding. So that nuclear is also emissions free, and it's why it's so appealing, I think, to folks on all sides of the political spectrum, is that it's, again, emissions free. It has all of these great features. It's not cheap, though. And because of the regulatory regime in place at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, it's very difficult to get a new nuclear plant built in a timely manner, which makes it more expensive. So if you can't get things done quickly, it just increases the cost. So that's why there's talk about small modular reactors, so smaller units that maybe can be more affordable. There's also a repurposing of existing nuclear facilities that maybe have been mothballed, and there is a federal utility called the Tennessee Valley Authority, or TVA, not too far from us, that has a really strong nuclear background and has nuclear facilities that it's bringing back online or expanding. And because it's a federal entity, it can do so slightly more easily. It still has to go through the Nuclear Regulatory Commission as well, but it is a little bit different position than private companies are to do that. So nuclear is on the table for everyone. It's just the question mark in everyone's mind is how can we get this regulatory process a lot more streamlined to be able to bring these facilities online more quickly.
Well, I think the future of the United States economy, we need these data centers. That's obvious. And there has to be new sources and supplies of electricity put online. I just hope one day that the federal government will say, here is a standard design for a modular or a regular nuclear reactor. If you can meet these guidelines, you get to build the plant instead of just, it seems like we reinvent the wheel each time someone wants to propose a nuclear plant. Is there any thought to standardizing a design so that
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, of course, you want some innovation to create the right design, but you might want to have 2 or 3 standard designs that make it easier to get through those processes. And there is that with some of the traditional nuclear. So the manufacturers are part of that conversation as well. You're absolutely right. And I think once it happens, it'll just be like boom, boom, boom. We really, we need to just get over that hump of the first mover. And you were talking about data centers for our economy. A rising tide lifts all boats. These data centers and hyperscalers have a lot of resources. And I think if the conversation is the right conversation at the local and state level and with utilities, it can be a really beneficial for the whole economy. Maybe not in the same way as a large manufacturer is. There's different pushes and pulls, right? But I think there is a lot of benefit to these, but it has to be a conversation and a very transparent one and a very clear-eyed one. And I think in Maryland, it really structurally, one of the first things that policymakers should be considering is whether or not the utilities can actually own the power plants again, because I think that helps you all with those financial equations and economic decisions that you don't have control over right now. Utilities are under the Public Service Commission in Maryland. And so if they own generation, there is oversight at the state level that can help some of those conversations more transparently.
Right.
Patrick, do you have any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I do. My closing thought is I look at AI in the same way that the automobile was about 1900, the same way airplanes were in about 1910. And I think to myself, why in God's name does it seem like our government at all levels is getting in the way of something that is, without question, the future?
Absolutely.
Imagine the United States trying to compete against China or Russia without having ever utilized the automobile in 2026 or the airplane. It blows my mind.
Absolutely.
AI is, we can generate the energy, the electric power needed to run this stuff. Why do we keep getting in our own way?
Absolutely. And I think it's an education like you guys are doing on this podcast. You have to educate people of what's the real story, and how we can impact that real story. Like, what do we do need to do at the state level, at the federal level where that's appropriate, at the local level. But certainly you're I could not agree more with what you said, Patrick.
Well, Joy, I'm looking at that old clock on the wall. I really do want this. This is an interesting topic. It's timely, and it's much needed. But I'm afraid we've reached a time where the end of our time is at hand. And Patrick, he was here without being here. That's magic. That's magic, my friend.
Well,
so it's time. Go ahead, Patrick.
When you told
What's that,
me
Patrick?
when you told me who our guest was today, I jumped for joy. I was so excited.
There you go. Well, Joy, we've reached the end of the show, and I'm afraid it is time to say goodbye, Patrick.
Goodbye, Patrick.
Goodbye, Patrick.
Joy, it was a pleasure having you on the show today. We look forward to having you back here soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.